What seemed like just another gesture of forbidden passion became the seed of a tragedy no one could have foreseen. Han Jae-hyun, one of the country's most respected CEOs, believed he was in complete control of his double life. With a simple movement, he removed his wedding ring from his finger, a symbol of his commitment to his wife Kang Soo-jin, and without hesitation, placed it in his lover's hands, as if that ring could seal a promise of a future with Lee Hye-jin. To him, it was merely a misplaced symbol, a mark of possession hidden from the world. For everyone else, however, it was the beginning of a turn of events capable of shattering not only his career, but also his honor before all of society. What Jae-hyun didn't imagine was that this very ring used to fuel a lie would become the centerpiece of a packed courtroom where his name, his morals, and his family would be relentlessly judged. Because when his wife Kang Soo-jin appeared before the judge, handcuffed and wearing a prison uniform, she didn't just bring tears or pleas, she brought that very ring, the very one that had been given to his lover, and with it in hand, she held up not just a piece of evidence, but a revelation capable of changing the course of history. Suddenly, the symbol of betrayal became a weapon of defense. The court, previously poised to condemn her, began to hear a story no one expected. The ring hid secrets that could prove her innocence, revealing that there was much more at stake than a love triangle. This wasn't just about love and betrayal, but about justice, revenge, and a power struggle where every detail could decide everyone's future. Brace yourself, because this isn't just the story of a broken marriage. It's a woman's desperate fight for her freedom, the unmasking of a man she believed untouchable, and the shock of a truth that could destroy or save lives. If this twist has already touched you, subscribe to the channel now and leave a like so you don't miss the rest of this surprising story. Before that night when Kang Soo-jin's world collapsed, there was a story built on effort, silence, and hidden sacrifices. His marriage to Han Jae-hyun hadn't begun amidst luxury or status, but in a small family ceremony when he was still just a young entrepreneur full of dreams and insecurities. It was by her side that he took his first steps, facing debts, sleepless nights, and social humiliations that could have ended anyone else. Soo-jin was the quiet force that sustained hope when everything seemed to be falling apart. She worked behind the scenes, handling the initial accounting, setting up impromptu meetings in cafes, and offering support when investors closed their doors. While he negotiated, she wrote reports, organized spreadsheets, and even cleaned the small office that served as the foundation for the future empire. For many, the Han Group was born of Jae-hyun's visionary talent. But those who truly knew the journey knew that Soo-jin's silent sweat also played a role in every achievement. Over time, the couple rose through the ranks. New contracts came their way, invitations to events multiplied, and their home in Mapogu was replaced by a mansion in Gangnam, surrounded by high walls and security guards. With each achievement, Soo-jin believed their union was growing stronger, but she didn't realize that Jae-hyun's ambition was growing to far greater proportions than his love. He began to value the opinions of influential investors and powerful politicians more than the word of the woman who had been by his side from the beginning. Still, Soo-jin didn't complain. I preferred to believe the coldness stemmed from stress and mounting responsibilities. When he came home late, she told herself it was just work. When the indifference became painful, she took refuge in old memories, like the days they shared simple meals and sincere promises. Silently, he held out hope that the man he once knew still existed behind the ruthless CEO mask. The public who saw them at social events would never suspect the emptiness that filled their home. Together, they were the perfect couple. He, the successful businessman, she, the discreet and elegant wife who always smiled for the cameras. But away from the flashes, Soo-jin carried on her shoulders the loneliness of a relationship that no longer felt mutual. However, this emotional chasm didn't form on its own. Gradually, a new presence would infiltrate the CEO's life, bringing with it the spark that would ignite everything and pave the way for the cruelest public betrayal anyone could imagine. It was in this context of cold routine and growing distance that Min Hye-jin emerged. Young, sophisticated, and the daughter of a congressman with strong political influence in Seoul, she was exactly the kind of person Han Jae-hyun believed he needed to solidify his next steps. Hye-jin entered his life first as an image consultant for a corporate event, but quickly became more than a strategic partner. With eloquent speech, refined manners, and a confidence bordering on arrogance, she knew how to attract attention and, above all, how to conquer the ego of a man already intoxicated by his own power. At first, the encounters were subtle. Extended meetings at expensive restaurants, untimely phone calls, work trips that became too long. Soo-jin noticed the change, but tried to convince herself it was paranoia. Her husband's constant absence began to become routine, and she increasingly found herself dining alone at a large table, staring at the empty chair that had once occupied a central place in her life. Rumors soon surfaced. In Gangnam, where the elite lived in a closed circle, rumors spread faster than the truth itself. Discreet comments at social events, leering glances during meetings, and even company employees commented in the hallways about the closeness between the CEO and the congressman's daughter. Soo-jin heard fragments of these conversations, but chose to believe none of it was real. The pain of facing the truth was more devastating than the hope of being wrong. Meanwhile, Min Hye-jin took advantage of every opportunity. She invited Jae-hyun to private dinners, appeared alongside him at gala events, and ensured that photographers captured the coincidence of their presence. Her strategy was clear: gradually occupy Soo-jin's rightful place, not only in the CEO's heart, but in the eyes of all society. With her striking beauty and the poise of a woman who knew exactly what she wanted, she became the reflection of his boundless ambition. Soo-jin, though she tried to remain firm, felt something crumbling inside her. With each sleepless night, each cold apology, her intuition screamed that the marriage was about to fall apart. But what she didn't imagine was that the mistress would not only settle into Jae-hyun's life, but would also be the catalyst for one of the greatest humiliations ever seen in Korean high society. And so, what began as discreet murmurs would soon turn into a cruel spectacle, as the CEO, overcome by vanity and delusions of grandeur, decided to expose his betrayal in the most devastating way possible. The night of ultimate humiliation was carefully planned by Han Jae-hyun. The event brought together Seoul's most influential figures in a celebration celebrating the Han Group's success. The room was filled with flashbulbs, calculated laughter, and attentive eyes on every move of the CEO and his wife, Gang Soo-jin. For the guests, it would be just another moment of prestige and ostentation. But for Soo-jin, the night would turn into a nightmare she would never forget. As the speeches continued and toasts echoed through the hall, Jae-hyun walked beside Soo-jin with the same confident expression as always. However, those who watched him closely could see the distant look in his eyes, as if he were waiting for the perfect moment to seal something greater. At one point, when all eyes were on the couple, he held her hand in front of the crowd. The gesture seemed affectionate, but it hid a cruel intention. With firm movements, he slowly removed the ring she had worn for so many years, ripping from her finger not just an object, but the symbol of everything they had built together. The hall fell silent, as if no one dared breathe. Before the astonishment could turn to murmurs, Jae-hyun turned and, without hesitation, placed the ring on Min Hye-jin's finger. She emerged from among the guests in a glittering gown, wearing a triumphant smile that seemed more like a declaration of war. The impact was immediate. Some women covered their mouths in shock, men exchanged uncomfortable glances, and journalists eagerly captured every second of the scene. Within minutes, images of that humiliation would spread across social media, accompanied by headlines that would destroy not only Soo-jin's image, but also her public dignity. However, at that moment, she wasn't thinking about the press, only about the searing pain that coursed through her body like an electric current, crushing her soul. Soo-jin stood motionless, as if her feet were rooted to the spot. Her heart seemed to be silently shattering, and her labored breathing betrayed the superhuman effort it took to keep from collapsing before the elite who were watching her downfall. The ring, which had once symbolized promises of love and fidelity, now shone in her lover's hand like a trophy of a dirty victory. The humiliation wasn't limited to betrayal. It was a spectacle staged before everyone to show that she had been replaced. Min Hye-jin, triumphant, held Jae-hyun's hand and raised her gaze proudly, as if to engrave in the memory of every guest that this was the beginning of a new reign. The glare of the cameras reinforced her victorious stance, while Soo-jin, with tears welling in her eyes, felt the weight of every gaze fixed upon her. It was as if the entire world had decided to witness her downfall. But within her, something unexpected began to blossom. The pain that consumed her gave way to a silent flame, a breath of strength that refused to die. Each humiliation registered as an open wound, but also as a memory that would one day become fuel. At that moment, she might not have had the strength to react, but she knew she would never forget the scene she had just witnessed. Soo-jin left the hall with firm steps, each click of her heels echoing on the marble as if an announcement of what was yet to come. The silence that accompanied her was more eloquent than any words, and her erect posture, even in the face of pain, made it clear that she would not allow this to be the last image of herself the world would see. What no one imagined is that upon leaving that hall carrying only her own pain, Soo-jin would plunge into an even deeper abyss where she would face irreparable losses before finding the strength to rebuild herself in silence. The night of humiliation seemed to echo in every corner of Kang Soo-jin's mind. Arriving home, the silence of the mansion's vast hall seemed even more oppressive than the hundreds of eyes that had judged her hours earlier. The space that had once brought her comfort now felt like a prison of memories, and every detail of the decor she had chosen seemed to mock her fragility. She slowly removed her coat, but remained motionless in front of the door, as if she no longer had the strength to cross the very rooms that once held the life of a couple. The servants watched her silently, unable to offer words of comfort. Some even looked away, aware that rumors of her betrayal were already circulating in the halls of the house. Soo-jin felt alone, even surrounded by people, and the loneliness became more cruel than the public scorn. With each step through the mansion, memories flooded back. The shared dinners, the late-night conversations, the old laughter that now sounded distant and unreal. In his room, he collapsed onto his bed and wept silently. His tears were not just from the public gesture, but from the weight of all the sacrifices he had accumulated over the years. He remembered the days when he accompanied Jae-hyun on his first battles, when he believed that together they would conquer the world. Now, the same ring that represented their shared strength shone in another woman's hand, and the thought pierced her like an invisible blade. The following days were even more devastating. Newspapers printed photos of the ceremony, headlines exploited her grief, and television programs discussed the replacement as if it were mere entertainment. Sujin couldn't go out without feeling the heavy gaze on her, and even former acquaintances began treating her as disposable. The weight of shame became an emotional prison, nearly consuming her completely. Yet, amidst the tears and despair, something inside her refused to disappear. Each night of crying became a reminder that she couldn't live forever in the ashes of a destroyed love. Amidst the collapse, a silent seed germinated that suffering, however heartbreaking, would not be her end, but the beginning of an unexpected new beginning. And it was precisely in the silence after the storm that Sujin would take the first step towards a transformation that no one could foresee, disappearing from everyone's lives to build in secret the foundation of her most powerful revenge. After the scandal, Kang Sujin disappeared from the spotlight. The elite who had once applauded her now wondered in whispers where she had gone, as if her absence were just more gossip fueling the boredom of high society. While everyone speculated, she silently packed her bags and left the Gangnam mansion, carrying only a few clothes, documents, and the bitter memory of the ring that no longer shone on her hand. The chosen destination was Busan, a coastal city that offered not only geographic distance, but also an emotional refuge. He rented a small apartment, overlooking the sea, and, for the first time in years, woke up without photographers at his door or servants murmuring in the hallways. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks became a kind of solace, reminding him that life could be simple, silent, and yet full of meaning. Amidst her grief for the life she had lost, Sujin made an unexpected decision. She enrolled in law school. She wanted to fully understand the system she had so often witnessed alongside her husband in corporate meetings, but which could now become the key to her own liberation. Evenings that had previously been filled with parties and business dinners were now dedicated to books, notes, and long hours of study. Each page turned was like a brick laid in the foundation of her new identity. The loneliness that initially seemed suffocating became fuel. Sujin discovered a strength within him that he'd never had the opportunity to reveal. He worked in small offices as an assistant, learned to handle minor cases, and faced prejudice from those who didn't believe a CEO's ex-wife could reinvent herself. Still, he persisted. What no one knew was that hidden in a small box lay the same ring that had symbolized her humiliation. To everyone else, it was just a useless reminder of a painful past. But to her, that object held more than memories. It held secrets that had yet to be revealed. As the years passed, Sujin became a different woman. Her eyes no longer reflected just pain, but determination. Her silence had gone from submission to strategy, and each step she took in Busan was a subtle step towards something greater. While she was rebuilding herself away from the spotlight, in Seoul, Han Jae-hyun's empire was beginning to show signs of cracks, and what had seemed untouchable was about to crumble before the very people who had once applauded him. While Kang Sujin was quietly rebuilding herself, Han Jae-hyun believed she was at the peak of her career. Alongside Min Hye-jin, she strutted her stuff at social events as if they were an unbeatable couple, and the press, captivated by the glamour, ran headlines reinforcing their image of power. However, behind the glitter of their public appearances, the empire was beginning to fragment almost imperceptibly, like cracks in a wall that seem small but portend an inevitable collapse. The Han Group, which had grown on the back of solid contracts and strategic relationships, became increasingly dependent on his father-in-law's political connections. This dependence, while temporarily strengthening his position, made him vulnerable to external pressure. Alert investors began to notice that Jae-hyun's decisions were more political than business-related, and confidence in the company's figures began to wane. What had once been a symbol of stability was turning into doubt, and doubt for the market is always the beginning of a downfall. Inside the house, the atmosphere was no better. Min Hye-jin, now officially introduced as his partner, proved to be far more demanding than Jae-hyun had imagined. If her presence had previously been a source of excitement and vanity, it had now become a source of constant tension. She pressed for more power, more money, and more control over the company's decisions. What had begun as passion and complicity quickly turned into a game of manipulation in which every word was a veiled threat. The first negative headlines began to emerge. Broken contracts, dissatisfied shareholders, and anonymous allegations of financial irregularities. Jae-hyun tried to cover up the scandals with his usual calculated smile, but behind the scenes, the pressure was mounting. He slept little, drank more than he should have, and spent hours locked in his office trying to find solutions that no longer existed. The man who once seemed untouchable was beginning to show visible signs of wear and tear. Meanwhile, former allies quietly drifted away. Friends who once applauded him at gala dinners now declined invitations, and politicians who depended on his money sought other financiers. Jae-hyun's loneliness grew as his arrogance had elevated him. The empire he had built with so much effort was turning into a fortress corroded from within, about to crumble before all who had once revered him. He didn't know it yet, but the abyss that opened beneath his feet would lead him directly to an unexpected reunion, where the past he tried to bury would return with relentless force. And it would be precisely in the courtroom, surrounded by attentive eyes and relentless cameras, that Han Jae-hyun would meet again the woman he believed he had destroyed forever, without imagining the devastating impact of this appearance. The Seoul courtroom was packed on that cloudy morning. Cameras lined up outside captured every detail. Journalists jostled for statements, and curious onlookers crowded to watch what was already considered the most talked-about trial of the year. Han Jae-hyun, once seen as a model of success, now stood in the dock, accused of fraud and embezzlement. His face bore the mark of fatigue, his sunken eyes betrayed sleepless nights, and his impeccable suit no longer conveyed the same grandeur it once had. The silence inside the courtroom was broken only by the sound of reporters' keyboards and the muffled voices of lawyers exchanging instructions. The tension was almost palpable. The judge announced the witnesses, and those present leaned forward, eager to see who would have the courage to confront such a powerful man. It was at that moment that the doors opened and an elegant figure emerged, transforming the heavy air into murmurs of astonishment. Kang Soo-jin entered with firm steps, wearing an impeccably tailored black suit. Her tied-up hair revealed a serene face, but her eyes shone with a steadfastness no one there had ever imagined in that woman. The shock was immediate. Jae-hyun's eyes widened as if he'd seen a ghost, and the flashes went off, immortalizing the reunion no one saw coming. The wife everyone believed had disappeared was there before him, not as a victim, but as a witness who could change the course of everything. The lawyers whispered, the audience stirred, and even the judge had to call for silence. Soo-jin walked to the podium without looking away, aware that each step echoed not only in that room, but also in the memories of those who had once despised her. The contrast was stark. From a woman humiliated before the elite, she now emerged as someone reborn, strong, and untouchable. The reunion wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. Here was living proof that silence can hide a revolution. Jae-hyun tried to compose himself, straightening his jacket and casting incredulous looks. His mind searched for quick explanations, as if he could still control the situation, but deep down, he knew this moment was beyond any script he'd written for himself. His racing heart betrayed the fear that the woman he'd underestimated held something far more powerful than words. The audience watched in complete fascination, as if watching a scene from a drama, but the difference was that this wasn't fiction. It was real life taking its revenge before their watchful eyes, and everyone knew that this appearance would change the course of the trial. What no one could have predicted was that, faced with that reunion, Jae-hyun would desperately try to recover what he had lost, begging for a second chance that no longer existed. From the moment Kang Soo-jin walked through the courtroom doors, Han Jae-hyun could no longer breathe with the same confidence he once did. The impact of that presence haunted him even outside the courtroom, as if he were forced to face the ghosts he had tried to bury at every moment. For the first time in years, he felt fear. Not of the judge, nor of the accusations tarnishing his name, but of the woman he knew better than anyone, and who, silently, had now become his greatest nightmare. That same night, unable to bear the emptiness, Jae-hyun sent Soo-jin long, emotional messages. He wrote that he was sorry, that he had been weak, that he had allowed himself to be seduced by Min Hye-jin's power and influence. He apologized in every line, begging her to listen to him just once. When the messages went unanswered, he sent flowers to the small law firm where she worked, trying to restore, with superficial gestures, the trust he had destroyed. Soo-jin, upon receiving the bouquets, felt neither nostalgia nor pity, but a strange sense of justice. She looked at the flowers coldly and asked for them to be donated. The messages on her phone remained unanswered, and each ignored notification was a reminder that there was no longer room for the man who had once promised to protect her. Still, Jae-hyun didn't give up. One day, he went to the door of her apartment in Busan. He waited for hours, sitting on the steps in the light drizzle. When she finally appeared, she didn't look away, just stared at him with the serenity of someone no longer carrying chains. He tried to get closer, begged, spoke of regret and longing. The words tumbled from his mouth, accompanied by tears he had previously deemed unworthy of a man of his stature. Soo-jin, firm, just replied with a sentence that cut like a blade. "Everything you threw away no longer fits into my life." Without raising his voice, without losing his posture, he closed the door, leaving him alone in the cold of the early morning. And it was precisely this unwavering refusal that preceded the moment in which she would reveal, before the court and the entire country, the most unexpected weapon, the ring that he had torn from her finger and offered to his lover. The courtroom was silent as the judge called for the next piece of evidence to be presented. The journalists' cameras flashed non-stop, trying to capture every detail of the trial that had already become a national spectacle. Han Jae-hyun, sitting in the dock, maintained a serious expression, but inside he felt his heart racing at a rate that betrayed his growing fear. He believed he knew every card on the table, but he had no idea that the most lethal one was yet to come. Kang Soo-jin stood up with the serenity of someone who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. He walked to the front with confident steps, his heels echoing across the wooden floor as if each beat were a sentence. His hand held a small, discreet box that aroused the curiosity of everyone present. When he opened it and lifted the object, a murmur ran through the room. It was the wedding ring. The same ring he had ripped from his finger that night of public humiliation and placed on his lover's hand. The impact was immediate. Jae-hyun's eyes widened, unable to believe what he was seeing. To him, the ring was no more than a discarded keepsake, but in Soo-jin's hands, it became a symbol of justice. She calmly explained that, contrary to what many imagined, the jewel held more than just feelings. Inside, it was meticulously engraved, a numerical code that corresponded to a bank account used for the Han Group's illegal transactions. The judge called for silence in the face of the commotion, but it was too late. The revelation had fallen upon everyone like a bombshell. The prosecutor, previously cautious, seized the opportunity to detail how the secret account financed bribes, fraudulent contracts, and shady deals that sustained the empire's meteoric rise. The pages of the case began to be leafed through hurriedly, each document reinforcing the veracity of the accusation. Jae-hyun tried to get up, gesturing desperately, muttering that it was a setup, but the evidence spoke louder than any speech. Min Hye-jin, sitting in the back of the room, paled as she realized that the very object she had received as a victory trophy was now being used to seal her downfall. Her haughty smile vanished, replaced by the silent panic of someone who realized she was involved in something much bigger than simple marital infidelity. Soo-jin, for her part, remained firm. There was no vengeance in her voice, only the serenity of someone revealing to the world the truth he had tried to hide. The ring, which had once symbolized love and commitment, now became indisputable proof of corruption and disloyalty. It was as if fate had held in that small jewel the key to dismantling the entire castle of lies Jae-hyun had built over the years. The entire room watched in absolute silence, absorbing her every word. Journalists typed frantically, lawyers exchanged incredulous looks, and even the judge seemed to struggle to maintain his composure in the face of the magnitude of what was revealed. For Soo-jin, this moment wasn't just about legal justice, but about reclaiming her own dignity in front of everyone who had once witnessed her humiliation. The verdict hadn't yet been handed down, but everyone already knew the CEOs. Fate was sealed. He who believed himself untouchable had been defeated not by great external enemies, but by his own arrogant gesture of contempt. What he had ripped from his wife's finger was becoming, in front of everyone, his cruelest sentence. And as the courtroom fell silent in the face of this irrefutable evidence, Han Jae-hyun's mind began to wander between memories and regrets, beginning a painful plunge into his own ruin. The silence that gripped the courtroom after the ring presentation didn't end there. It followed Han Jae-hyun into the prison of his own thoughts, like a shadow that couldn't be dispelled. In the days that followed, sitting in the leather armchair of his empty office, the man who had once been feared for his arrogance stared at the bare walls as if scenes of his own decline were projected onto them. In that space, where so many decisions had been celebrated with gifts and million-dollar contracts, now only the hollow sound of his heavy breathing reigned. On the table, newspaper clippings depicted his downfall, headlines that spoke of corruption, betrayal, and ruin. He ran his fingers over the pages as if still searching for a glimmer of denial, but the printed words were as harsh as the looks of contempt he now received from society. The once revered business visionary had become a model of dishonor, studied as a case of blind greed that consumes not only fortunes, but also souls. The memories came in waves, increasingly violent. He remembered the night he had ripped the ring from Soo-jin's hand, the cold indifference with which he had thrown the symbol of a lifetime to the floor. He remembered Min Hye-jin's haughty smile, the lover who seemed to give him the world when, in truth, she was merely sucking his essence. He remembered the brilliance of the flashbulbs that transformed his arrogance into a spectacle, headlines that once extolled his fortune and now exposed his downfall. And each memory was accompanied by a gnawing question: when had he lost everything? He had believed that power bought respect, but now he understood that respect had never been within his reach. Those who bowed before him were driven by fear and self-interest, never by true loyalty. The only person who had genuinely supported him, even silently, was Soo-jin. And ironically, it was the woman he had scorned and humiliated who stood before everyone as a symbol of courage, using the very object he had given his lover to prove his innocence. It was as if fate had designed, with cruel precision, the most painful way to punish him. In the solitude of that office, tears flowed silently, so different from the pride that had always prevented him from showing fragility. He who had so often boasted of never being shaken, now wept like a child, powerless in the face of his own misery. The man who controlled empires was stripped of his mask, forced to face the void. Each tear carried the weight of broken promises, destroyed loves, and ruined lives. He spent sleepless nights wandering among untouched whiskey bowls and drawers full of worthless contracts. He wondered what would have happened if he had chosen differently, if he had looked at Sujin with the same respect he demanded from the world. But the past cannot be rewritten, and he knew the story had already been told in front of everyone, with justice as the stage. As he sank into regret, he heard, through the news and the whispers of the people, Sujin's name echo as a symbol of resistance. She, the wronged woman, had achieved something he never had, true admiration. Not through wealth, not through power, but through the dignity of facing humiliation and transforming pain into strength. Jae-hyun realized this was the greatest punishment of all, watching the rise of the one he tried to erase. The echo of his downfall came not only from the decline in business, but from the knowledge that he had lost what no amount of money could buy: the respect, love, honor, and memory he would leave to the world were now tarnished. He would be remembered as the man who destroyed his own life out of pride, while Sujin would be remembered as the woman who found justice amid injustice. And so, in that once imposing office, Han Jae-hyun's figure shrank, like a giant finally seeing himself naked in a mirror. The silence that once seemed like punishment now became his only companion, reminding him that the true prison has no bars. It rises within the consciousness, where no power or fortune can free. As Jae-hyun dissolved into shadows and regret, fate had a very different ending in store for Sujin. A moment of affirmation that would show everyone that suffering can become a symbol of justice, and that even the most relentless ruin can make way for the rebirth of a new story. When the verdict was finally read, the courtroom fell into a silence that felt like centuries of waiting. Han Jae-hyun, once revered as a symbol of success, was now found guilty, condemned. Not only for the financial crimes he committed, but also for the arrogance that led him to underestimate those who loved him most. The sound of the judge's gavel echoed like the closing of a cycle, and for the first time in many years, he understood there was no going back. Kang Soo-jin stood erect, her serene face reflecting not the joy of revenge, but the dignity of someone who had gone through hell and emerged stronger. As he left the courtroom, he held the box containing the ring, a symbol of pain transformed into justice. The object no longer represented the broken promises of a marriage, but rather the silent victory of a woman who refused to be erased by a man's cruelty. The jewel's gleam in the afternoon sun seemed to announce to the world that the truth, sooner or later, always finds a way to reveal itself. Outside, dozens of people awaited her departure. Some applauded discreetly, others watched in respectful silence, but all recognized the strength emanating from this figure, who had once been humiliated and now walked with firm steps. Sujin didn't bow to the stairs, nor did she seek approval. She moved forward, aware that her story wasn't just hers, but that of so many women who silently carry invisible pain and who, upon seeing her courage, would also find their own voice. As she walked up the courthouse steps, the wind blew through her loose hair, and each step resonated as a reminder that no fall can forever silence those who carry the truth. A journalist's camera captured the moment she raised her gaze to the horizon, and that image would become a symbol of resilience and justice, shared thousands of times on social media, not as a spectacle of pain, but as inspiration for those who believed their stories would never be heard. The ring, which had once represented submission and humiliation, was now kept as a trophy of courage. Sujin moved on, leaving behind the ashes of a past that no longer defined her. There was no hatred in her heart, only the conviction that life had given her the chance to be reborn. Final message: what he discarded became the evidence that destroyed him, because the truth, even if late, always shines through. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss future episodes. Share in the comments if you believe regret can erase the past or if justice should always prevail. And don't forget, the next story will surprise you even more. Click the next video and continue this exciting journey with us.